Sure. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the first web meeting of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus in 2021. Hopefully this will be a better year. I'm Illinois Representative Robin Gable, chair of the caucus, and I'm glad you're all taking the time this morning to gather virtually with your fellow GLLC members to learn about important developments related to federal policies and funding for the Great Lakes. I want to acknowledge my fellow officer, Minnesota Representative Jennifer Schultz. Did you see? I wasn't sure if I saw her here, but I think she is, who is the GLC's new vice chair. And I also want to acknowledge our two past chairs, Indiana Senator Ed Charbonneau and Minnesota Senator Ann Rest. Thank you for your continuing involvement. I'm sure we are all versed in Zoom, so we'll skip the Zoom instructions. If you need a refresher, the slides for today's meeting include the Virtual Meetings 101 slide that was showing just now, so I encourage you to consult that slide if you need assistance, or you can contact the staff through the chat. You'll find the PDF of the slides in the chat and on the GLC's website at greatlakeslegislators.org under Events. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with our organization, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus, or GLLC, is a binational, nonpartisan organization dedicated solely to educating, engaging, and serving state and provincial legislators from the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River region. Clean water is essential to support a healthy population, a thriving economy, and a well-functioning ecosystem. And so the caucus is organized around the guiding principle of assuring that the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River provide a plentiful source of clean, affordable water to the region's residents, businesses, and industries, both now and in the future. We're the only Great Lakes organization whose members have the authority to pass laws and appropriate funding at the state and provincial level. So we are a unique and influential group that needs to be at the table in any regional policy discussions on Great Lakes issues. Membership is open to any state or provincial legislator serving in the 8 states and 2 provinces in the region. There is no cost to become a member, only benefits. If any of the legislators on the line haven't yet enrolled as members, I strongly encourage you to do so. You can visit our website. And I also encourage all members to reach out to their legislative colleagues who may be interested in Great Lakes issues and encourage them to join our organization. So today we are going to be hearing from Chad Lord. You know, we are an organization of state and provincial legislators, but we all know that states and provinces can't restore and protect the Great Lakes on our own. We need the federal governments in the US and Canada to do their part, and they have a very sizable part. We try to keep tabs on what is happening at the federal level with regard to policies, programs, and funding for the GLLC's priority issues. Our speaker today is one of the people we regularly turn to for information on federal developments in the US. Chad Lord is the policy director for the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition and the Senior Director for the Waters Program at the National Parks Conservation Association. Before joining NPCA, Chad served for 5 years as Senior Legislative Assistant for U.S. Representative Betty McCollum of Minnesota. Chad is originally from Minnesota. In fact, he is a proud graduate of St. Olaf College, and now he lives in Washington, D.C. with his husband and daughter. Welcome, Chad, and thank you for speaking to us again. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Representative. I would just say umyaya for all of you Olis out there. Yeah, I did grow up in Minnesota, so I really appreciated the conversation around the weather. It's what I have with my mom almost every week. Although I will tell you, there's a lot of Midwest weather on the East Coast today. Schools were disrupted, as they are in most places across the country, and so it's been a bit of a whirlwind in trying to get my daughter situated. I also was chuckling to myself when you showed that picture of me in that slide. I don't think I've worn that suit in almost a year, given COVID. You can see I've kind of got my uniform on today. I mean, it's it's a really different kind of way of living. But I'm really happy to talk to you all today a little bit about what we see is happening here in Washington and ways for folks to be engaged. So if we can go to the next slide. Real quickly, I just wanted to just describe to you who we are. We are a coalition of over 160 non-governmental organizations from across the region and across the nation, for that matter. We have a lot of national organizations as well. We have staff, including Laura Rubin, who is our director. We also have communications and field staff, and then I manage our policy team. But we also have leaders in almost every state that really help us coordinate activities, and you can see who some of those folks are in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and New York. We don't cover Pennsylvania all that much just because it's got that tiny little sliver, and so we don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time there, but we do try and cover the other states. Next slide. And just, so a little bit of just, we've been successful as a region, and these are just a little bit of the successes that we see from our coalition. That picture there was from our annual Great Lakes fly-in to Washington. We host it every year in March. That was last year's. I think that was probably the last in-person event. I don't know, maybe anyone held last year. We were able to take that photo on a beautiful spring day here in Washington in early March. But like I said, we have successes. We passed the new 5-year authorization for Great Lakes restoration funding. We've been focusing our efforts to try and increase the prioritization of wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater infrastructure, including ensuring equitable access and affordability of those water services. COVID clearly has highlighted the need more than ever. We as a coalition early on in the COVID crisis did try and provide assistance to our own groups who were struggling. We've held state policy roundtables. We continue to see strong bipartisan support for the Great Lakes restoration agenda, and we continue to grow our coalition to involve, in particular, more people of color and organizations working with people of color in order to have a true and equitable representation in what we are talking to federal policymakers. And of course, we have our Great Lakes Day in Washington, which actually is happening in a couple of weeks. And last fall, we also had our seminar series, which we are open to do again later in the year. I only mention all of this because these are ways, we would love for members of the GLLC to participate in any and all of our events. Next slide. So here's what 2021 looks for us as part of our campaign. We're going to continue to try and win robust federal support and funding for Great Lakes restoration and protection. We will continue to serve as a critical convener that will hopefully amplify Great Lakes non-governmental voices here in Washington. We'll continue to leverage our diverse membership and explore what priorities should look like for 2021. Again, invite you to join us in that exploration. We'll continue to foster our diverse coalition to include the inclusion of all of our perspectives of our membership, and also then another focus is efficient and effective and equitable Great Lakes spending to make sure that all of our partners are benefiting from these resources. Next slide. And then we are integrating equity and climate into everything we do. These are probably the biggest questions and issues that are facing the region. And so we're looking at how we can address, the things that we see already. And so trying to integrate that into our policy agenda, our events, our decision making, et cetera. Next slide. And so let's talk a little bit about what the policy landscape looks like. The next few slides will go into a little bit more detail on what that looks like. And like I said, I really hope to also end today's presentation and then have a discussion in terms of where we think folks in the caucus can get involved. So the big change in Washington is that we've got a new administration and we've got a new Congress. The parties may have flipped in the White House. The parties flipped in the Senate, but even still, I mean, the majorities of in the Congress in particular are incredibly narrow, and we almost have an evenly split House of Representatives, and we have a very split, very split U.S. Senate at 50-50. And I only mention the congressional kind of situation just because it will impact kind of the policy making, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then obviously we have the new administration, and this is an administration that has prioritized, 4 clear areas, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for the region in each of them. So COVID obviously is something that they have prioritized, and we're seeing now being debated in Congress, the administration's COVID plan. Economic recovery. I think the Biden administration calls it Build Back Better, but it's really, I think focusing on economic recovery and infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really address things like drinking water and wastewater infrastructure in the region. This administration has also prioritized racial equity or equity in general, and I think really ensuring that the resources and the investments are equitably distributed to every community throughout not only the Great Lakes region, but around the country. And then they have also, I think, no surprise, talked about climate change. And I think, we've definitely seen we've definitely seen changes in the Great Lakes environment. I mean, with lake levels being at record highs and just only a few years ago being at record lows. And so I do think there are some things that, some new things that we are witnessing that I think, we can address through some of the policy that has already been enacted, but potentially coming forward in the U.S. Congress. Next slide. So here's our agenda. I mean, these are the things we're focusing on. It's not meant to be exclusive, and I know it probably excludes a lot of the things that members of the caucus are thinking about. And I would very much like to hear the other things that may not be on this list, because we do try and pay attention to what others are working on and work in partnership. So, we will continue to prioritize Great Lakes restoration funding. As I noted earlier, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative was reauthorized for another 5 years at increasingly higher levels of funding, and we are hoping to see appropriations match that goal, the goals set in that law. And so we'll continue to press forward with trying to increase money for the GLRI, working towards more equitable and community-led implementation of projects through that program. There are a lot of other programs that we highlight as well that are in addition to the GLRI that we will also continue to focus on to ensure that the Great Lakes region is seeing its fair share of federal resources to really tackle the legacy problems that still exist in many of our communities across the basin. Water infrastructure, it's going to be a huge thing for us. For those of you that have been around for a while, you may remember that the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy from 2005, kind of that restoration blueprint, noted that we had, I think there's billions of dollars in need of fixing our wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater infrastructure. The EPA has also documented, billions of dollars of need, and others have put scores of, scored, what is needed to really improve the region's plumbing. I mean, we have very old infrastructure. We have just old cities and just old infrastructure in the region, and that needs to be repaired. And so we'll be really focused on trying to reauthorize and increase federal investments to ensure that our water infrastructure is resilient and affordable. Affordability is increasingly becoming a crisis for a lot of folks in the region, and I think COVID really kind of really shone a light on that as people, households were some households were being left without water during a crisis where hand washing and clean water were so important to the public health response. And so we will be making water infrastructure a really big issue this year, especially given we have an administration that's focused on infrastructure and Congress that has at least indicated they want to work on it. Just next week, for example, on Tuesday next week, a House committee will be holding a hearing on wastewater infrastructure needs. And there are a lot of Great Lakes voices who will be testifying from Ohio, Wisconsin, and New York. And so well represented in terms of the need and urgency to address this issue. We'll also be focusing our efforts on strengthening clean water protections, strengthening the Clean Water Act. We have emerging contaminants like PFAS. We have toxic algae blooms that continue to pollute water sources. And so ensuring that our rules and regulations can match the threats that are faced with that our communities are facing is something that we'll want to continue to look at and help communities address. Again, partly through increased appropriations, but also through ensuring that we're watching for those contaminants and being able to manage them in order to ensure public health. Invasive species obviously is still a big issue, and making certain that invasive carp don't make it through Chicago is a high priority. And so we'll continue to focus our attention at building resiliency in the defenses outside of Chicago through, by a special focus on Brandon Road, Lock and Dam, but also looking at ensuring strong ballast water protections is also something we will be lifting up. So it's an important thing for many of our members. And we'll also see, also be talking about the algae blooms, trying to host roundtable discussions this year to see kind of what federal solutions might look like, especially when we're beginning to think about what the Farm Bill could look like when that comes up, I think as early as next year. But also, trying to secure resources to help communities stop harmful runoff, either from, whether or not it's from agriculture or city streets, to see if we can't get handled. We think there's real room to make progress on all of these. We feel like we have real room to make progress on all of these issues. Next slide. Why? Because we still have a lot of Great Lakes leadership here in Washington. Just in Congress itself, you can see here just the appropriations for funding and infrastructure. We have just really senior leaders who are on key committees, and so we feel like we can really forward this agenda and really build strong and maintain strong bipartisan support between both members of both parties. Infrastructure as well. I mean, we have folks from across the basin who sit on key committees who will be important voices. I will note this is just a sample. This isn't the full list. This is just a sample. I couldn't include everybody on this slide, but I wanted to at least give you some of the examples of folks who are from the basin who sit on some of these key committees as a demonstration that will continue to hopefully see real progress in addressing Great Lakes priorities in the U.S. Congress. I would also note, we have an administration, as noted, who has outlined an agenda that I think is very consistent with our perspective in terms of what needs to actually be done to address real issues in the region. And given the political power of the region in presidential politics, I do hope that this administration will be responsive to the Great Lakes states, and so that's also something for us to think about. We'll go to the next slide, please. So just a few things that we're keeping in mind as we put together our approach in terms of trying to succeed in achieving our these kind of policy goals. I already mentioned that there are very narrow House, Senate, and Senate majorities, while in the Senate it's evenly divided. And so what does that mean in terms of policy making is still kind of an open-ended question, although we're, I think, seeing quite a bit of energy, at least in the House and the Senate, even with those narrow majorities, to try and move legislation, or at least the debate on legislation, forward in order to address many of the issues that we're raising. So how that all plays out, given the narrowness of the U.S. Congress, is still to be determined. We have elections coming up in 2022, and believe it or not, people are already thinking about that. I think with those narrow majorities, the parties are evaluating, how to maintain, those majorities, and so how that shakes out in terms of the way the parties respond to issues is going to get wrapped up in the politics around the 2022 election. I would also note, even when looking forward to the 2022 election, there's still some fallout from what happened with 2020 election, and fallout and what we saw on January 6th here in Washington. And it's still not quite clear, exactly how how the members will be working together through some of those feelings. And so that's something too that could have an impact on agenda setting. Redistricting, that will influence the 2022 elections, no doubt. It will impact all of your elections as well, I imagine. And we won't know what that looks like, I guess, until the fall. I saw a note that the Census Bureau isn't going to post reapportionment information until I think September at the earliest. And so, how that plays a role in decision making is something too that we're just cognizant of. And then COVID, I mean, it's still I think grateful that seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. But the COVID crisis still dominates a lot of the policy discussions here in Washington, and it's still, I think, something that we'll continue to see as for reasons, because there's, for good reason, in terms of, how the Congress helps states, cities, people respond and to the fallout of the COVID pandemic. And so that too is something that will influence the prospects of enacting policy. We go to the next slide, which I think is the last one. So that's just a real quick overview. Like I said at the beginning, I see real opportunity to advance a number of key priorities. We still have strong bipartisan support to fund Great Lakes restoration and protection through things like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which has been a tremendously successful program. With increased funding, I think it will allow us to also expand the scope of that program and really zero in on other kind of emerging problems. So I think there's real opportunity there. I think water infrastructure is a real opportunity as well. Although I think we have work that is needed to really highlight the urgency for Congress to address water infrastructure and to make sure that the things we can't see on surface infrastructure is easily seen and easily felt when you're driving along the roads. But it's also, but that infrastructure you can't see sometimes is lost in people's minds. And so I think it's really incumbent on all of us to just continue to highlight the urgency for Congress and this administration to ensure that when we're talking about investing in economic recovery, that really has to include helping communities build resilient wastewater, drinking water, stormwater systems, moving forward. And the other things too, I think there are real opportunities to address these emerging contaminants like PFAS. I think there are opportunities to look at how to stop runoff from farm fields or city streets that may be contributing to toxic algae blooms, really helping farmers, for example, to really use cover cropping or other types of best practices or whatever the case may be. And so I do think there's some opportunities there to really put together a strong Great Lakes agenda that can inform future policy debates, especially as the Farm Bill gets underway. So there are definitely some areas where I think the caucus could be very, very helpful. Just continuing to communicate support for restoration funding like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or pushing the Biden administration or congressional leaders to invest in water infrastructure, I think would be very welcome and very timely, especially in the next few weeks. Our groups the coalition is going to be in Washington in 2 weeks, meeting with members, and so it would be a perfect time, I think, for members to also be hearing from you all as to why these things are so important for Congress to address as soon as possible this year. I would also note, because water infrastructure funding really is often, it's funded through formula grants to the states. I mean, the states have a real role to look at and do oversight into how state revolving fund monies are being spent. And are they being invested in communities that need the most help? Are people being able to get on the intended use plans? How can we ensure that communities that need the most help can get more flexible financing options, for example, and they may not be able to afford even a low interest loan, or there other options that could help them be able to afford their really expensive infrastructure improvements. And so those are often state decisions, and made it, and so that could be an area of oversight, even in your state capitals. But federally, definitely, kind of conveying, an urgency to fix these problems is going to be very, very helpful. And so, we definitely welcome you to join us in conveying those needs. So those are just a few ideas, a little bit of the landscape, and at least some of the things that we're working on where we see real opportunity. I mean, I know others are paying attention to the transportation system, the SUE locks. I know our partners are paying attention to. I don't mean to ignore coastal resiliency. I mean, the lake levels are an incredibly serious issue, and we also are talking about the need to fund the Army Corps' coastal resiliency study to really prepare the region with a plan and how to address high lake levels and then potentially even record low lake levels. So that's something we're integrating more broadly into our agenda. So that's what I had to say today. I'd be happy to answer any questions folks had, and I think I just saw one.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for that, your insights on what's going on at the federal level. We greatly appreciate it, and appreciate you coming out today. Although you don't have to go out at all, right? You get to stay in your house.
Right.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'm just going to follow up with this question around cultural resiliency, because that is an issue that we're going to be looking at this year as a priority. And it sounds to me like that may not be ready for federal funding yet, but that it's time for us all to really come up with some planning on that issue. And maybe it'll be something that we can then bring to you the next year to help us advocate for more funding for it. But I'm not an expert in that area. So can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the resiliency to climate change?
Yeah, there's a number of things that are happening. So as I mentioned, there is this unfunded Corps study that we're continuing to try and get resources to. The Corps would work with all sorts of other partners, other federal agencies in the states and local partners, to really focus on building resiliency in the Great Lakes kind of shoreline. And so that's a planning effort, right? So that doesn't necessarily address the issues as they are right now. And I think some of the other things that we are paying attention to, how can we use programs and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is funding projects. It's not designed to fund breakwaters or kind of like those kinds of projects, but it's funding more natural approaches. So wetlands, soft shorelines, those kinds of approaches is something that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is investing in. There are other programs that partners are bringing forward that could also be very helpful. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has their Building Resiliency and Communities Program, or BRIC program, and that is a program that is designed to do pre-disaster mitigation. And it's not per se a climate program, but I think people see, the intense storms that we're all experiencing, and trying to get on the front end of that. So as we're seeing these heavy rains and increased flooding, that communities are being prepared to address those on the front end rather than trying to clean up the mess on the back end. And so and then there was also a bill that Senator Gary Peters had authored and was enacted into law, Storm Act, which would create a state revolving fund specifically designed to help with some of that pre-disaster mitigation work in kind of the coastal areas. And so there are a number of things out there. Some of them are newer than others, like that BRIC program, that storm program, are newer. but there's a number of things out there through NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, other federal agencies that do fund kinds of more natural approaches and other things that communities and states could tap into or have tapped into or are tapping into. And then there's just a larger climate debate, which I think the way I always look at it is there's two sides to the climate conversation. There's just reducing carbon dioxide emissions or climate emissions that are kind of contributing to warming climate, and then which is a long-term issue, right? And then, but we're already seeing things now. So how do we help build resilient systems that can adapt to those heavier rains, to those changes in heat and cold, as we're seeing across the country now? So how do we address what's happening right now as well? And so, a lot of that is, I think, be debated in terms of federal policy, but also there are a lot of things out there now that can be useful to local communities.
Excellent. Lisa, did you want to moderate the questions?
Sure, and just a reminder, as you see on the slide here, which we'll take down in just a minute so we can have more video of people. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and and you'll unmute your line. And you can also type your question in the chat, or you can email it to me. If you're calling in and don't want to speak, you can email it to GLLC@csg.org. And as Chad noted, we do have a question. It's from Senator Janet Bewley from Wisconsin. Can you comment on pending investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, that is pipelines and natural gas generation plants? While we can't convert to wind and solar overnight, we need to address the beginning of the end for these investments, and the timeline is challenging.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't work on energy, so I can't talk to you specifically. I can't really answer that question directly, just because I don't know. But I think the general question, I think, is an important one, because there is a transition that I think is part of what I'm hearing is part of at least the federal debate in terms of how do we transition from how do we make that transition from energy sources that may be contributing to climate change towards energy sources that don't. And so that is people have talked about renewable energy standards, and I know there are a lot of Great Lakes states that have them. I think my home state of Minnesota, I think, has one. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've thought about it. So a lot of states have already kind of moved in that direction. And so some of that state leadership, I think, it'll be interesting to see how that may percolate up into kind of a federal discussion.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Can you explain what the increased authorization levels are for the GLRI, and explain why authorization is important in securing actual appropriations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the new bill will increases the authorization for the program in the upcoming fiscal year. Starts at $375 million, and then adds $25 million a year for the next 4 years. So by the 5th year program, it would be authorized to receive funding at $475 million, so almost $500 million. Why it's important for a program to be authorized is that it does set the baseline level of funding that Congress can appropriate to the program. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that Congress will appropriate funding to those programs at those levels, but it does set a higher benchmark to which we all can hold them accountable. Because I know for the coalition's purposes, we will be asking them to support the office level of $375 million for the upcoming fiscal year 2022, which starts on October 1st. And so it is an important acknowledgement by Congress that there is still a tremendous amount of need, and hopefully the funding will follow.
Okay, great. I have a question, and that is, you mentioned the interest in more equitable and community-led projects. So I was wondering, what are some, recognizing that ideally all projects would take into consideration equity, but what are some of the projects that would be the highest priorities for promoting equity? And do you have any suggestions for what legislators can do? What specific steps they can take in order to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And I can't point to any particular project. I think there are categories of issues that I think are ones that I think are drawing our attention. So the one that comes immediately to mind is the cleanup of areas of concern. We still have areas of concern throughout the Great Lakes region, and so we still need a tremendous amount of support in order to clean them up and get them delisted. And so some of the things we think about when we think about equity and equitable spending include ensuring that things like the public advisory councils that are set up to help guide these cleanups reflect the communities where these areas of concern are. So ensuring inclusive kind of outreach, something that we are focused on. We also are we also hear and want to lift up our membership's desire that when money is spent in their communities, that folks in those communities have access to those jobs. And so workforce equity is a part of that equitable spending, really ensuring that the communities that are receiving the federal resources are the ones that are also benefiting more broadly from those federal resources. Obviously, the cleanups benefit at the macroeconomic level, but what we're talking about is really leveraging these resources to really support job development, economic benefit in neighborhoods that may have been neglected or whatever, and making certain that folks are at the table to be able to describe those needs and see if we can't work in some of those ancillary benefits in a holistic, comprehensive way. We think that it's just a plus for us if these federal resources can really help cities, just invest in their neighborhoods in ways that are comprehensive and holistic. And so that's a little bit of the way we think about. And then also, the other part of kind of equitable spending is ensuring that all of our membership is able to participate in, the prioritization of projects that are being applied for and funded by things like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, to ensure that at least at the local and state level, that the priorities reflect what's on the minds of everybody in those states and cities. And so those are some of the things we think about, and when we think about equitable spending.
Great. And Representative Gable, we have one more question in the chat. Will new investments in water infrastructure be included in the larger infrastructure bill that's being talked about by the Biden administration?
Boy, we hope so. And I hope that if you all can help write, the Biden administration maybe a letter asking them to make sure that is indeed the case, I think that will definitely help. We really do hope that the Biden, and I think it's true. I don't know. I can't imagine that the Biden administration doesn't see the value of investing in water infrastructure. But a lot of times it seems like a lot of the discussion on infrastructure tends to be on the things you can see. So roads, railroads, airports, broadband, those kinds of things often get a lot of attention. And the things that are underground often don't. And I think, like I said earlier, are very much want to just raise the visibility, not only for the administration, although it's important for them to include these investments in the budget that they'll be proposing. I think I saw some notes yesterday that their quote unquote skinny budget, or kind of the top line budget proposal, will be out mid-March, with the full budget to come out, federal budget to come out sometime, I think in April. So it'd be great to see what they have to invest, but then also Congress, they're the ones who make a lot of these decisions. And so ensuring that, our congressional leaders understand that it is the expectation of our region that, infrastructure we consider infrastructure not just to be roads, but also what's under the roads, those pipes, because water is a basic need. Everybody needs it. And right now, it's lead pipes, those, contamination, broken pipes, all that stuff needs to be fixed because we just got to really, definitely we're hopeful, we're optimistic, but we're not resting on our laurels, and we'll continue to press all of our elected leaders. And that's what we'll be doing in a couple of weeks when our advocates are here. Here. They won't be here in Washington in person, but as they meet with their members of Congress virtually, they'll be raising these issues with them.
That's it for the questions, but I do see that Senator Senjum has indicated he hopes that the caucus can write a letter. Important subject. That funding is very much needed.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know, Lisa, is there a process for doing that?
Well, yes. If it's something that interests the members, I can certainly add it to my shrinking list of things to do before the end of next week to get the ball rolling. The best way to do it would be or the fastest way to do it would be to have the executive committee send the letter on behalf of the caucus, because that's fewer votes needed, fewer signatures to collect, and just a streamlined process.
Okay, great. We'll talk about that a little later. Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Chad. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your ideas with us. And I look forward to seeing you at the reception that the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition is co-hosting with the Embassy of Canada on March 2nd. I encourage our other GLLC members to register and to attend as well. And we're going to be posting a link in the chat for you if you'd like to register. I understand there's going to be a special keynote speaker there. So
we hope. I can't tell you. We hope. I can't.
I know it's a secret.
A little tease, but we hope. We're actually two special speakers, hopefully, that I hope will be exciting for folks to hear from. And thank you for bringing that up. I'm embarrassed that I didn't even bring it up, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah, please join us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we're now heading into our business session. Chad, you're welcome to drop off, or you're welcome to stay on.
I'm going to drop off. So thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to come on anytime you would like. So thank you for the opportunity to share today.
Great.
Be well, everybody.
You too. You too. We'll see you March 2nd. So now we're going to start our business session. I encourage all our members to stay on for this, and non-members are welcome as well. It's very short. We're going to be ending at 10. So I just have 3 items for our business agenda today, starting with my very first chair's report. First, I'm very pleased to be chairing the caucus this year. We have a new executive committee, and which convened in January, and we have a lot of new faces and energy on the committee. I'll be excited to see what we can do this year with all the new energy in 2021 and 2022. One of the first things the committee already did was to approve having the GLLC sign onto shared federal policy priorities with our fellow Great Lakes organizations. This is the 3rd time we have co-signed with our colleagues, and we welcome the opportunity to collaborate with Great Lakes partners across the region. The priorities will be released in time for Great Lakes Day, the first week of March. So watch for those to be shared in a member update on our website and on Twitter. And you will be able to share those as well on your own Twitter and Facebook or websites. So similar to last year, we're going to have an active year. We have a total of 6 web meetings in 2021, including this one. We used to meet quarterly, but there's so much important information to cover that we decided to switch to a bi-monthly basis. Web meetings will take place every 2 months in even numbered months, with the next one coming up on April 9th. That web meeting will be hosted by the caucus's Task Force on Nutrient Management. Third, we also have our annual meeting tentatively planned for September 24th to 25th in Quebec City. We are hopeful that meeting will go forward as an in-person meeting, but we recognize that with the pandemic, it may interfere with these plans. So regardless, we do plan to have an annual meeting this year. We'll have to wait for a few months to settle on which capacity it's going to be in. And finally, I'll conclude by noting that this year we'll be holding our second Patricia Burkholz Institute for Great Lakes St. Lawrence Policy, and I will let the new co-chairs of the Burkholz Institute Steering Committee share information on the event during their report, which is the next item on this agenda. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Senator David Senjum and I believe also Senator Laura Fine are the new co-chairs, and they will be presenting the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I heard all right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's good to be with you today. About a week ago, I went to a meeting, and as most of our history is would reflect, if we go to come out with a job, and so Senator Fine and I from Illinois came out with the job of organizing and this year's Burkholz Steering Committee, which will go forward and produce for this group, I think, an excellent conference towards the end of this year. I'm a state senator from Minnesota. I've been here 19 years. I've done the leadership stuff, minority, majority leader, that kind of thing. I spent most of my legislative life on capital infrastructure issues. Now, and more recently, have been elbow deep in energy and climate and those kind of issues. So to some degree, I was attracted to this, and we're going to have a fine conference. Let me just go through my notes here that Lisa put in terms of the Burkholz Steering Institute.
Senator Senjum, I think unless it's
charged
just
with
me, I think
organizing
your
this
line's
year's
breaking up.
Patricia Burke Great Lakes St. Lawrence policy to just take a small group of committed GLLC
Senator Senjum, can you hear me?
members into
Senator
a deep
Senjum.
on an issue, and this issue had to deal with the. Can you hear me?
No, we can't. You're breaking up. So I wonder if there's a way for you to reconnect, and maybe Senator Fine can pick up where you left off.
Absolutely. So as my colleague was saying, we're both very excited to co-chair this wonderful program this year. I'm Laura Fine. I represent the 9th Senate District in Illinois, which is along the border of Lake Michigan in the northern suburbs. So a little background about the Institute. The purpose of the Institute, oh wait, is my partner back? Can he pick it up from here? Is he reconnected?
I'm back, but I'm not sure of my bandwidth.
Okay.
I think that's
Connected,
a no.
but can you hear me? Or is it poor?
It's poor.
You may want to try turning your video off. Sometimes it's just the amount of bandwidth.
Why don't you just carry forward?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I'll just take it from here. We're a team.
You just take it from there.
Okay. The purpose of the Institute is to take a small group of committed GLLC members on a deep dive into an issue on the caucus's policy agenda. This year, the focus will be on helping coastal communities to become more climate resilient. The Institute is an educational activity that ultimately leads to coordinated regional action by the caucus and its members. Specific outcomes will be a position statement, an action plan, and model policies that the GLLC will adopt and then seek to implement. These items will be researched and written by the new Task Force on Climate Resilience, which will form after the Institute itself and will consist of members who attended. We call these members the Burkholz Fellows, and I'll have more about the Fellows in just a minute. This will be the second year that we're offering this core activity for the GLLC. The first Institute took place in 2019 and focused on reducing nutrient pollution throughout the region. In fact, the next item on the agenda is a report from the Task Force on Nutrient Management. The institutes are named in honor of the late Michigan Senator, Patty Burkholz, who was the founder of GLLC. So this holds an important place in many people's hearts. The Burkholz Institute Steering Committee met for the first time last Friday. During the meeting, we agreed to hold this year's institute in Michigan in late October or early November. Fingers crossed. Hopefully we'll all see each other in September for GLLC and then again in October or November. The format will be a weekend workshop. It'll begin on a Friday and run through Sunday. To prepare for the workshop, we'll also hold 1 or 2 more web meetings beforehand to provide the Burkholz Fellows with important background information so that they can prepare for the intense weekend of learning and discussion. If you are interested in being a Burkholz Fellow this year, the application process is going to begin this summer, and we'll have more information on that process and the dates and location of the Institute as we move on later into the spring. We are very happy that in 2019, the Great Lakes Commission will be working with, just like in 2019, that the Great Lakes Commission will continue to work with us to plan the Institute. We're also pleased that the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative will be joining us in this work. As noted earlier, the caucus is working more closely and consistently with other Great Lakes organizations. We think the Burkholz Institute is a natural fit for this type of region-wide collaboration. We want to thank a couple of people, including Eric Brown from the Commission staff and Matt Doss of the city's initiative for serving on our steering committee and helping us with this important work. And the steering committee is going to meet again in late March or early April. Hopefully by then we will be able to see the ground and these feet and feet of snow will actually be melted. We are looking for representatives from the provinces who'd also like to share in the work of the committee. We're looking for people from Indiana, New York, or Pennsylvania who might be interested. And if you are interested, I would say reach out to Lisa in these next few days and we can move forward from there. So thank you so much, and I look forward to working with my partners in this, and including Tim Butler from Illinois. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, senators, for your report. I'm sorry that your bandwidth wasn't working very well, Senator Senja.
I don't know if you can hear me, but rest assured that Senator Fine and I will do a wonderful job on this. It's something they're all going to want to be a part of. So I urge you to consider this. This is going to be an outstanding institute.
Yes, I believe it will. And I think that this is becoming a critical issue as we see more climate changes and storms and other things affecting our coastline. And I do want to congratulate you both for being elected to lead the steering committee. I think it's in good hands. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Lisa, who's going to give the report on the Task Force on Nutrient Management.
Representative Gable. Well, the Task Force on Nutrient Management emerged from the 2019 Burkholz Institute. They produced a resolution, action plan, and model policies that the caucus adopted, all of them by September of last year. And they're all intended to reduce the incidence of nutrient pollution in the region's water bodies. The task force is hoping to hold an in-person workshop this summer, August specifically, in Ohio to continue their education and to touch base on any legislative action related to the model policies or any need to tweak those policies. This workshop should have taken place last summer, but the pandemic prevented that. The task force is also going to host 2 web meetings this year to share with all of you some of the examples of the state programs that were the models for the policies. And the first event will be April 9th, and the date for the other one is to be determined. Blue Accounting is part of it's a website created by the Great Lakes Commission, who assisted with the Burkholz Institute in 2019 and also now is represented on the task force. So the task force has been working with the commission staff to post the model policies on the website so that we can track progress with any legislative activity. Blue Accounting is intended to track all of the progress throughout the Great Lakes region to show, the impact of the national and regional and individual jurisdictions' investment in Great Lakes protection and restoration. So we're pretty excited that this will be a new thing for the commission to include information on that website specifically for a legislative audience. They're going to be doing the same thing with the policies, the model policies on lead that the caucus prepared a few years ago. The task force is chaired by Senator Andre Jacques from Wisconsin and has capable subject matter expertise provided by Nicole Zaccarda with the Great Lakes Commission. And I'm happy to tell you all that the new staff to take my place staffing this task force is Dr. Carolyn Orr. She does a lot of the agriculture consulting for our office. For those of you who went through the Burkholz Institute, Carolyn was one of the producers in our role-playing exercise during the working dinner. And she's going to do an excellent job. I think she's really the best pick to do this. We're very lucky she agreed to do it. The funding for this particular activity comes from the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. And I am hoping before I leave, I'll be in touch with Melissa Damashki, our program officer there, and excuse me, working with her to ensure there's funding for the task force to continue its work into 2022. Lastly, the task force will meet on the 24th of February. That's Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. I will be sending the appointment to the members later today. And additional members are welcome to join, especially we could use some more representation from Indiana. We don't have any representation from Minnesota or Pennsylvania. And if anyone from New York wants to join Assemblyman Malczyk as a member, that would be welcome as well. And that's the report.
Thank you, Lisa. You know, I just want to encourage our members to join these caucus committees and task forces. The caucus is only as strong as its members are actively engaged. And these committees and task forces are a great way to really become experts in these arenas. You can't believe how much you learn and how much you share and how much it really benefits your states to participate in these caucuses and committees. So I really want to encourage people to do it. It really is one of the benefits that you get from joining the caucus, the GLLC. So in closing, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Joyce Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. We greatly appreciate the support we receive from these three foundations and their recognition that state and provincial legislators are vital stakeholders to engage in the policymaking process in the Great Lakes region. I personally just want to thank you all for attending. This was a very nice turnout, and I hope that you will all come to the other 5 web meetings that we're going to be having this year, and especially come to Quebec City in September. I've been there before for GLLC meetings, and besides for being an informative session, it's just a great place to spend a little time. So I'm going to send it back to Lisa for some final comments.
Great, thank you. I'm looking for where my final comments went. Well, I'll just ad-lib it. So I'll follow up on today's web meeting with an email that'll contain a link to where you can find the recording and the slide deck if you haven't already found the slide deck. And I'll talk to the officers and the executive committee about putting together the letter that Senator Senja mentioned. I just wanted to now acknowledge this is my last GLLC web meeting. I can't believe we started these back in 2012 when web meetings were kind of unusual. We've changed the platform to Zoom now, and I think it's really nice to be able to see everybody's faces. Next Friday is my last day at CSG after 29 years. And it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. I'm going to retire and be spending a lot of time with my mother who moved in with me last year, and she's 93. She's in good health, and I want to keep her that way for many years to come. But I'm also going to be engaging in public service, working with legislators as closely as I've had the chance to do. You really inspire me. So I chair the Sustainability Committee for my city of Middleton, and I'm going to be working, I hope, on a strategic planning process with the city government. And I also plan to engage in or step up the anti-racism work that I've been doing here in the community. So I'll be busy, but I hope to tune in from time to time and see what you all are up to. And I wish you the very best.
We wish you the very best too. If you could put our faces back up. Thank you. So if anybody has any final comments for Lisa? Well, thank you from all of us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you all. And I hope you'll all have a warm weekend someday, if not this one. And I'll be in touch. And good luck to all of you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye.
Bye-bye.